RADO espère que ceci permettra une amélioration des conditions de détention dans les prisons réalistes.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة. السيدات والسادة أعضاء وممثلي الحكومات والدول المحترمون، سعدتم مساء. في الوقت الذي نجتمع فيه الآن هنالك انتهاكات صارخة لحقوق الإنسان يتعرض لها الشعب البحريني الذي استبيحت دماؤه وأعراضه وحرمت مقدساته، حيث استخدم النظام البحريني مستعينا بقوات الجيش والشرطة والأجهزة الأمنية والقوات السعودية التي استظلت تحت ما يسمى بقوات درع الجزيرة الأسلحة المحرمة دوليا كالغازات السامة ورصاص الشوزن والآليات العسكرية لمطاردة المتظاهرين وتهزيهم، بما يتنافى حقوق الإنسان وكل المواثيق والأعراف الدولية التي صادقت عليها الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة. لقد فقد النظام البحريني شرعيته منذ أول يوم سفك فيه دماء الأبرياء، ناهيك عن عدم احترامه للقرارات الدولية، وما تقرير لجنة التحقيق الدولية برئاسة الدكتور السيد بسيوني والإدانة الواضحة للنظام فيه إلا دليل إلى ما أشرنا إليه. فمن تسييس القضاء وأخضاعه إلى إرادة السلطة الحاكمة، مرورا بالسماح بإفلات الكثير من الضباط والمسؤولين عن عمليات التعذيب الممنهج، وصولا إلى الأحكام التعسفية الصورية الظالمة التي تفتقر إلى أبسط القواعد والنظم القانونية، والتي صدرت بحق المتظاهرين السلميين وتعريضهم لأبشع أنواع التعذيب، حيث وصل عدد المعتقلين إلى أكثر من 1400 معتقل، توفي 4 منهم تحت التعذيب. وعلى ضوء ذلك نطالب ما يلي: أولا، تقديم من أصدر الأوامر العليا بقتل المتظاهرين العزل وكل جنرالات الجيش والوزراء ومسؤولي الأجهزة الأمنية من الذين ثبت تورطهم بسفك دماء الأبرياء إلى محكمة الجنايات الدولية. ثانيا، نطالب بخروج قوات ما يسمى بدرع الجزيرة التي غزت البحرين وتقديم قادتها إلى المحاكم كونهم شركاء في الجرائم التي تعرض لها الشعب البحريني. ثالثا، إطلاق سراح جميع المعتقلين دون استثناء، رجال ونساء، وبالأخص الأستاذ الخواجة وابنته زينب والأستاذ نبيل رجب وغيرهم من الرموز الذين يقبعون في سجون النظام. رابعا، إرسال بعثات دولية لتقصي الحقائق وتسليط الضوء على الجرائم والانتهاكات الصارخة لحقوق الإنسان التي يتعرض لها الشعب البحريني. وشكرا.
Señora Presidente.
Madam President, thank you very much for giving us the floor. We are representing the Permanent Assembly for Human Rights, the World Council of Churches, the American Association of Jurists, and the International Association of Peace Messenger Cities. We wish to say that we're very concerned when faced with the threats and aggressions that the indigenous leader Felix Diaz has suffered. Since 2010, the COM community has had an open conflict with the government of the province of Formosa because of the occupation of community land. The leader's children and grandchildren have also been threatened and attacked on several occasions with the acquiescence of the local authorities. The result of such confrontation was the setting up of a dialogue made up by the APDH, Nobel Laureate Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo, and CELS. They were received by the Minister of the Interior, but to date no solution has been found. Because of the extreme seriousness of the case, on the 21st of April, the national state was urged to protect the life of Felix Diaz, his family, and the members of the community. The request was made by the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, who said, and I quote, "It was because of possible threats, attacks, and harassment by members of the police, the public order, and state officials." End of quotation. But this has not been guaranteed to date. We would urge the government of the province of Formosa and the national state to bring about measures leading to the protection of the physical, mental, and moral integrity of Felix Diaz, of his family, and the COM community. Similarly, we'd urge them to bring about the relevant provisions to make sure that the indigenous community Potai no Pokna no Vog can fully enjoy their rights to community land as recognized and guaranteed by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's also guaranteed by ILO Convention 169 and the country's own national constitution in Article 75, Para 17. It's a situation which we've brought to the attention of the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples and the Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial, Summary and Arbitrary Executions. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President, it is estimated that indigenous and tribal people in India represent only 8.2% of Indian population. continue to face with extreme poverty in terms of income level and socio-economic conditions. They are also often one of the most marginalized segment of national population, making it difficult to monitor poverty and socio-economic indicators or access the specific impact of corruption on indigenous people. As a disadvantaged groups, they have less access to decision makers and fewer opportunities to participate in economic and political life. They also have a weaker voice to assert their rights and entitlement, making them easier targets for corruption. They find it more difficult to communicate their needs to policy makers, participate in public policy making, and effectively demand accountability. Corruption in India today is known to have a disproportionate impact on the poor, indigenous and tribal people in terms of income inequality, access to essential services and resources distribution. There is a little empirical research specifically focused on the impact of corruption in indigenous people in India, since indigenous people belongs to marginalized and socially disadvantaged group that experience various forms of poverty and discrimination. It is responsible to assume that the literature exploring the links between corruption, poverty and disadvantaged groups may at least to some extent also apply to indigenous people. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Overdue. The panel strongly affirmed that reprisals and intimidation against those who seek to cooperate or have cooperated with UN human rights mechanisms are simply unacceptable. We are encouraged by the strong rejection of such practices by states from many regions and the recognition that states are responsible for ending reprisals. Not only for the sake of protecting individuals from harm, reprisals can take various forms, including harassment, intimidation and violence, but may also include arbitrary refusal or termination of consultative status by member states of the ECOSOC NGO Committee. The Secretary-General also highlights that cooperation can mean many things, ranging from simply learning about avenues for using the UN human rights system to sustained engagement on a regular basis. 2. The report makes clear that the cases contained therein are but the tip of an iceberg of yet unknown dimensions. And 3. The inclusion of follow-up in the report affirms the need to ensure that old allegations of reprisals do not drop off the radar. This last point is also among the areas most in need of improvement. Madam President, while the panel and the latest Secretary-General report are positive steps, ending reprisals requires more action, political will, and creative responses by all stakeholders. Let us highlight 3 steps that can be taken immediately by those in this room. 1. Delegates from states concerned are urged to inform the Council on an ongoing basis of steps taken to protect individuals mentioned in the report and provide remedies and reparation. This should not take away from the annual dedicated discussion we hope to see when the Secretary-General's report is published. 2. Each opportunity for bilateral and multilateral dialogue must be used to raise cases of reprisals as documented in the Secretary-General's report and to discuss follow-up. This must include the upcoming UPR review, but also the elections to the Council in the General Assembly in November. And 3. Finally, individual ambassadors in Geneva must prioritise protection for human rights defenders, including those who cooperate with the UN human rights mechanisms. This should be done in close coordination with all stakeholders. Thank you.
Libération.
Thank you. Madam President, peace is the primary goal of the United Nations and the major reasons of its existence. In the preamble of the UN Charter, the peoples of the world proclaimed their determination to succeeding generation from the scourge of war and to live together in peace with one another as good neighbor based on the principle freedom of peace, justice to the world. The right to peace and justice for indigenous people is not just a decent right, but it is also a birthright because we also want to live in peace. The historic UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People endorsed 5 years ago by the human rights body is a clear, profound, and conceptually dauntless open testimony that seeks toward empowering indigenous people to defend their collective rights to land, territories, and resources. However, the implementation is still a tough task, and this is the biggest challenge and obstacle faced by indigenous people because the term indigenous people is not acknowledged by India. The Northeast India, the ancestral homeland of more than 250 communities, continue to suffer from different patterns of human rights violation now for more than 2 decades. With the increasing militarization and other marginalization by India, there has been less priority given to many economic, social, and other cultural rights. This includes the non-recognition and the non-inclusions in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution to one of the rich Khasi indigenous language, which is spoken by the Khasi indigenous community in the state of Meghalaya. Madam President, language plays a significant role in the way a race is identified. Language has a multifaceted relation to the culture, tradition, history, custom, and a long-established way of life for the indigenous people. In any human race or society, as long as language lives, the race or society lives on. Death of a language is no less the death of a human race. This is the situation of the indigenous peoples in India. We recommend the Human Rights Council to strongly urge the government of India, 1. To fully implement and promote the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. 2. To include Khasi language and other language of India's indigenous people in the 8th schedule of the Constitution of India, and to implement all the recommendations of the human rights bodies and mechanism in its national policies and program. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, in fact, the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples is absent, so my statement serves little purpose. I think we have heard so many statements, fora, visits to the country, and yet there has been no noting of the serious violations of the human rights of indigenous peoples, particularly the peoples Mapuche and Ichile. As far as Tupac Amaru is aware, the Special Rapporteur has never participated in the meetings between the expert group and indigenous peoples so that he could actually hear the complaints of people who've been victims of serious human rights violations and violations of fundamental freedoms. We're referring to one aspect of his thematic work, aiming to promote good state practice and good practice amongst the agro-industry business. What does the Special Rapporteur mean by good practice exactly? The globalized world is governed by few transnational corporations with very many branches throughout the world and transnational financial organizations as well, and they play a key role in this globalized consumption and financing system. Big business have huge power. They're set up in indigenous lands, and in fact, they have greater power. Indigenous peoples are aware of the fact that representatives of the Secretary General and representatives from an open-ended working group will not be able to defend people's community land. We have to think about the activities of the mining industry. They have no ethics or morality and are not interested in human rights. Tupac Amaru has always argued for a code of conduct, a binding code of conduct governing the activities of big multinational companies. The President, Organization.
Thank you, Madam President. My NGO shares our deep appreciation of report of the Special Rapporteur on the right of indigenous people. It is evident that indigenous people across the world continue to be the most oppressed, discriminated and isolated people. My NGO wishes to draw the kind attention of the Council to the plight of indigenous people of India's northeast region. The policy of population transfer in Tripura and Assam has disposed the indigenous people from their land, and indigenous people have been reduced to a microscopic minority in their own land. Adding salt to the festering wounds of, are the mega development project that the government of India is undertaking in pursuit of its Look East policy and Vision 2020. Constructing of mega dams, highway and railways, clearing of forest for mining and plantation, declaration of indigenous land as natural reserve and wildlife sanctuaries have denied many indigenous people their very means of subsistence. The projects are carried out without the prior informed consent of the indigenous people or adequate compensation and alternative land and housing provided to the millions of indigenous peoples already displaced or soon getting displaced. The problems in the region is essential political and character, and that the approach in resolve such problems must also essentially be political, and in doing so, the committee reminded the government of India to be mindful of its obligation under Article 1, 19 and 25 of International Convention of Civil and Political Rights. Liberation only remind the Council of this world of wisdom by the committee. Thank you, Madam.
Muchas gracias. Madame la Présidente, dans quelques jours auront lieu des journées de commémoration de massacre du 28 septembre 2009 en Guinée, à la suite desquelles rien de véritablement concret n'a été obtenu permettant de croire à la fin de l'impunité en Guinée. Le 27 août dernier, des faits graves et inédits comme des tirs à balles réelles sur les véhicules transportant les responsables